Please be seated. So colleagues, staff, and members of the gallery, we have a really special treat tonight for the singing of our national anthem today. I'm here and pleased to introduce 23-year-old Lexian Brown, also known as Jag. Jag's a Christian rapper and R&B singer from the Bahamas. He moved to Canada in 2014 to pursue his love for music and enrolled in Fanshawe College's Music Industry Arts program. Jag graduated in 2016 with the Sony Songwriting Award and now getting ready for a tour around Canada. But before he does, he agreed to join us here in London, Ontario, and I'd ask you to please help me welcome our friend Lexian Brown as we sing O Canada.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Please be seated. Actually, Steve Hillier could have sung like that. I know he could have, you know. It's, maybe not. Okay. Colleagues, I'll be right with you. First, let me ask for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. I know I've got it. Seeing none, I will ask Councillor Cassidy to take over the next part, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425.
Thank you. And while you're there, Councillor Cassidy, I believe you have a recognition.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I want to call everybody's attention to something that was created with our Accessibility Advisory Committee, working together with our accessibility expert here at City of London, Melanie Stone. They created this flyer because to highlight that not every child can participate actively in trick-or-treating the way we just take for granted by going up a step and going to somebody's front door. So this little flyer that everybody will get a copy of just explains how to make your home more accessible for every child to be able to actively participate in trick-or-treating. They have been at Storybook Gardens, the Accessibility Advisory Committee, for the past 10 days. They've handed out about 3,000 of these flyers. And they are also available at community centers and the Thames Valley Children's Center. And so far, this program has been very well received.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. I'm not aware of any confidential matters to be considered in public, so I will look for a motion to move into closed session. Councillor Van Hol, seconded by Councillor Lehman. We'll turn your attention to the screen soon. We are asking the clerk to do triple duty here, jogging being her third gift, and as we'll vote shortly.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, colleagues. As we move to Committee Room 3, let me advise the gallery that while we're not always 100% sure of the exact moment we are going to conclude closed session, we've set it for approximately 5:15. It might be a bit earlier, might be a bit later, but just as a courtesy to let you know that, colleagues, let's recess now to Committee Room 3. Please be seated. Colleagues, welcome back, and to our gallery, welcome back as well, although I think we were the ones who left. We have the minutes of our October 15th meeting, and I'll look for a mover, please. Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Van Meerbergen. Any discussion? Then we'll call the question. Turn your attention to the screen.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
Thank you very much, colleagues. There are no communications and petitions and no motions to which notice is given. So I'll turn your attention to 8.1, the report of the Planning Environment Committee. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Your Worship. I'm pleased to present the 18th report of the Planning and Environment Committee. I have not received any requests to have any items moved or pulled back, so I would like to put all the items on the floor. I would like to make a few comments, though.
And as we do you mind if I just ask if colleagues have any items they wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Back to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship. And with that, I'd like to put all the items on the floor. I would like to make a comment about the meeting. It was not too lengthy, and I'm sure you've had an opportunity, or I would encourage my colleagues to read the draft citywide urban design guidelines. We're in the process of receiving the guidelines, sending them out to stakeholders. There will be a public participation meeting, but these are guidelines that we are going to be implementing, updating, and would encourage you to make sure you take a look at it. Any concerns, questions, you can always pass those comments on to staff, and would encourage you to do so. I also just want to make a comment that we are holding the 2019 Urban Design Awards here in London, November the 7th at Museum London. And the first time this year, we are opening it up for the People's Choice Awards, which end October 30th, and would encourage the public to make choices. It was quite interesting. I was part of a vetting group of a number of submissions and learned an awful lot hanging out with landscapers and planners. And one thing, it's very educational, and it is very eye-opening when you look at developments that we have supported, built, and then how they fit in our urban fabric is really quite an exciting opportunity to give feedback. And with that, I'll put the rest of the items in. We did receive a delegation request from Mr. Mike Wallace from the London Development Institute as well on the guidelines. We had a number of public participation meetings. There is a request to demolish a building at 1600 White Oaks Road. I just want to remind Council that it is just for the building. The land still will remain remain designated. And with that, I move the items.
Thank you. I'll just clarify in item 3.1, it's 6100 White Oak Road, just in case there was any confusion, but thank you. Any other comments or questions with respect to the report? Then I'll turn your attention to the screen as we call the vote.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 15-0.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Now the 20th report of the Corporate Services Committee, Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I have the 20th report of the Corporate Services Committee before you. I'm not aware of anybody who wants to deal with anything separately, so I think now would be the appropriate time to inquire about that. Otherwise, I'd be happy to move the full slate of the agenda.
Does anyone wish to have any of the items withdrawn for separate discussion? Seeing none, Councillor Morgan.
Yes, just a couple of things to highlight. I don't always do this, but I do like to highlight the good work of our staff. When we did our request for proposal for the insurance and risk management services, there was a 13% reduction in the premiums that we would be paying. That's about $360,000. So certainly the RFP process has worked very well for the taxpayers of London and has led to very competitive bids, and we'll be moving forward with that at a reduced rate, which is great news and great work by our staff. I had a report there myself from the Canadian Federation of Canadian Municipalities Board of Directors meeting, which I attended in September. I didn't include a cover letter because, as I said at the committee level, most of my cover letter would have related to things I would have wanted colleagues to do in advance of the election, and I knew that this would be reported after the election was over, so it seemed like that was a little bit redundant. But I do want to let you know, as an update to that report, that the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is working very hard on the first 100 days plan. The Elections Readiness Committee, which I vice chair, certainly didn't end with the end of the election. There is a plan to try to follow through with all the parties, particularly in a minority situation, on the promises they made and commitments they made to Canada's municipalities. And so that will be very important work ahead. And I will be returning to Ottawa with my FCM colleagues at the end of November, which will be a very important part of that lobby effort to ensure that those promises that were made during the election are delivered upon for Canadian municipalities.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments with respect to the report? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I actually found this corporate services report rather interesting. There's a lot of fascinating items, including our insurance and liabilities associated with that. I had an opportunity to have a discussion a little earlier to find out the questions that I had about it, and so I'm satisfied with the answers on that. The one question I do have is with respect to the vacant anyway, the vacancy subclass tax rebate to reduction or elimination. As I read through this, I just want to make sure that my read of it is appropriate. That the net effect of this is to shift the ratios of the tax classes in the other classes by reducing the rebate, or is it a net? I guess a net impact to the budget itself. So it looks like it might have a bit of both, but I was just trying to read and get a better understanding of how that's applied.
Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, I'll make the dangerous path of commenting and then asking our treasurer to correct me when I'm wrong. My understanding is that the other classes within the tax structure are subsidizing this rebate, and by removing the rebate, there would be adjustments made in the future to the need to go to those other tax subclasses. There's a chart on page 26 which outlines the impacts that the rebate has had on the other subclasses and what it would look like without them, without it existing. So I see the treasurer nodding, so that means maybe I'm in a safe territory on that comment.
That's helpful. It sounds like I was reading it appropriately too, so that's good. So the second question, actually more just well, no, there's a question. With respect to MPAC, and there's kind of two different interpretations, and one different interpretation comes from the letter from the Chamber of Commerce. So my assumption on the vacancy tax rebate and the subclasses as well was that that MPAC had changed its assessment criteria for assessing vacancy or not into its modeling for the valuation of those lands. And as such, that made the vacancy tax rebate itself a little redundant because we'd switched things. So now you're getting a double discount, one from the MPAC assessment and changes, and the second from the vacancy tax rebate. The Chamber kind of pushes back on that a little bit and says that only is in extreme circumstances and when the vacancy exceeds 3 years. Is there any comment to that, or in terms of how it's actually applied with respect to MPAC's assessment criteria?
Ms. Bourbon?
Through the chair, our understanding is that MPAC does include that as part of their evaluation, particularly with respect to vacant land. Because that land is undeveloped, that would be built into the valuation and realized through that process accordingly.
Councillor Turner?
That's great. Thank you. And it was nice to see the value and recognition by the Chamber of the impact of bus rapid transit on supporting businesses within the core and throughout the city. It's good to see that that reinforced by our business community as well.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan?
If there are no further questions, I'm happy to continue with passing all this stuff.
Then I will turn your attention, sir, was there another question there on? I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. 14th report of the Civic Works Committee, Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have not heard of any matters to be pulled, but perhaps somebody does wish a matter pulled.
Are there any items that colleagues wish to deal with separately? Seeing none, back to you, Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll move the matters. I do want to comment on item 16, 5.2, just to bring some clarity. That's a matter that came to us on Monday. It was a report of the Cycling Advisory Committee. They prepared a cycling master plan review plan. That matter came to us. We have sent it to staff, who received it on Monday. Staff, as I understand it, is going to review that. They will come back to us after reviewing same and provide us with information so that we can have further input on that issue. And that's where we are today. So we look forward to getting it back from staff and seeing what we can implement and what other things may present challenges. So those are my only comments, Mr. Chair, and I'll move the report.
So noted. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Turner. Oh, pardon me, Councillor Squire, you have another thought.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Your Worship, through you, I just wanted to ask a couple questions. One with respect to the community energy use and greenhouse gas emission inventory and update on the development of the 2019 to 2023 Community Energy Action Plan. So I found this a very interesting and helpful report. It took a look at our historic trends and projects out a little bit. I think I'm going to tie some comments in a little bit because as Councillor Squire talked about, the recommendations and input that came from the Cycling Advisory Committee kind of ties into this a little bit. We have some identified goals in terms of our energy use and reductions. As I try to find them really quickly, the first takes a look at a current goal. Next is that 2030 goal. For energy reduction, and the final one is a 2050 goal. All is that to say is that we have a lot of work to do. I think that's kind of the summary. It identifies energy use in each sector. It takes a look at the way we build, the way our buildings are constructed, the way we move around the city, and what sectors and what sources of energy are using and contributing to our greenhouse gases. In the last couple of years, we saw a pretty marked spike in our energy usage and decreasing the gains that we had made over time. I guess my question really is, have we extrapolated this out? I saw an extrapolation graph that kind of showed some modeling, but I'm not sure how much it took into account what the changes were over the past couple of years to say, are we on target to meet those goals? And what level of actions are we going to take in order to meet those goals? And the second question to that is, do those goals remain appropriate? It looks like the federal goal was and directives towards municipalities was set around 2005. So that's a historic, about 15-year-old goal. what do we need to do from here to start to take a look at and making sure we're modeling appropriately?
Ms. Sher?
Thank you, through your worship. We are on track to meet our goal of 15% by 2020. We look at a 3-year rolling average or long-term rolling average because we do see spikes, particularly when we have years that are both hot and cold, as 2018 was. So a lot of that spike was related to home cooling and heating. That said, this is likely one of the last reports you're going to see in this format related to this issue. We are, as a response to the declaration of the climate emergency, along with our colleagues in planning, working on developing a report that will come forward and outline a new plan to ensure that we have reviewed those goals, that we are taking the appropriate strategies to meet those goals, both as a corporation and as a community, and then we'll be reporting out on those targets once that's done. So that report is pending very, very shortly in a matter of the next, well, we're hoping in the next month to 2 months or so. We've just got a little bit of work to do on it right now. It's actively been through our leadership team actually just this morning.
Councillor Turner?
Thank you. That's helpful. So I think there's we're going to see a lot coming up on this front, and there's a lot of plans, documents that are going to be coming forward that need review, and they're going to feed into a whole bunch of other things. That kind of segues into to number 16, which is the 10th report of the Cycling Advisory Committee, as identified by Councillor Squire. The recommendation to refer to staff is the appropriate recommendation. I'm glad the committee saw fit to do that. I'd like to thank the members of the Cycling Advisory Committee, especially the working group, of putting together such a comprehensive report. I think what it identifies is that there's a lot of areas. When climate alone, to take a look at the transportation master plan, the cycling master plan, the city's official plan, our climate change action plan, trying to think if there's any others, but there's a number of reports and strategies that the city has that will need to be reevaluated as we go forward and determining on what action and grounds we take on the climate action plan that comes forward. So through you, Your Worship, just to staff, I guess, is to say, will this, the report that was generated by the Cycling Advisory Committee, I'd imagine that in referring it to staff, it'll be disseminated to each one of those areas, whether that's planning, whether that's engineering, whether that's, I guess, whether it's planning or engineering, to be considered with all of those documents.
So who wants to know? Ms. Sher will take this on. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, we will be sharing this report broadly internally for review. It's a comprehensive document. There's a lot of work there. We are not in a position, obviously, to advise on the content at this point because we need to give the due diligence of the review it requires. It touches on things like development standards, on planning issues, on transportation and mobility. There's a lot of issues in there that touch many, many service areas, and we would welcome the expertise of all of our colleagues in providing good advice.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate that too. So I think one of the things that I highlighted is that that some of the strategies we have are going to take a review in order to see if we can meet our targets and if those targets are appropriate. One of the most striking parts in that was specifically around mode share of transportation within the city, and whether the targets that we have in terms of shifting from single occupant vehicles and vehicle transportation in general to transit and to cycling and to pedestrian and active infrastructure, or active modes of transportation, are those going to be sufficient to meet our targets? And the conclusion of the report was no. Not as such right now. So in order to do that, we're going to have to see a fairly significant mix of mode share that is non-car related, and we might not be able to do that on electrification alone of vehicles. We might not be able to do that alone on transit. That there are going to be other factors that help to achieve those goals. So I look forward to seeing staff's perspective on those. I think the work that's being done at the staff level and that's being done at the community level goes quite a ways. And I think between those two reports, what that illustrates is what a significant amount of impact and influence we have at the municipal level in addressing climate change.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I also wanted to comment, and I appreciate the comments of Councillor Squire as well as Councillor Turner on the 10th report of the Cycling Advisory Committee. I think a lot of us received a lot of correspondence on this, and so I wanted to deal with a couple of aspects of this, and I know there's a number of members of the public here as well. I certainly had the ability to speak with both the chair of the committee as well as a few members, as well as a number of people in my ward who cycle all the way into downtown. And yes, people in the suburbs do actually rely on cycling infrastructure, even all the way out in Ward 7, and some of it isn't great. And so the feedback of this committee is pretty important, both to council as well as to me as a councillor to understand how my constituents are using the different types of infrastructure that we deploy in our corner of the city. I will say, with respect to the process, I think, and on social media, I think there were some comments that were made that weren't necessarily accurate of the process that happened. I know that the committee had a very intense discussion about this, and people expressed their opinions. However, what the committee produced and what I looked at is, I think, the best possible outcome for those who drafted a comprehensive report. The committee basically said the remaining clauses of the CAC report be referred to Civic Administration for consideration and action as appropriate. That is a very strongly worded motion that says we're going to put this into the municipal process. That doesn't mean everything in the report is going to be necessarily done. It doesn't mean that nothing's going to be done. It means it's going to go into a series of processes and assessments like every other thing that we do in the corporation. Some require budget, some require maybe a referral to Mr. Fleming, who's working on a climate emergency, and how we deal with that report. As Councillor Turner said, it's going to impact different parts of the corporation. But we're able to deal with it and put it into that process. And I think the committee should be very happy that is where the report is going, because that is how the municipality takes action on items like this. It may not be fast enough for everybody. It may not be the process that everybody wants, but that is how a large corporation like the City of London deals with a report and decides how to take action on it. The one thing I did note in that report too is the continuation of the deferral of the work plan. And I want to say, in general, committees' work plans are really important. The work plan is basically the agreement between council and the advisory committees on the types of things that are going to be worked on. So that's council's opportunity to say, hey, advisory committee, we've got a number of things that we need your expertise and advice on. It's also an opportunity for the committee to say, hey, council, we want to flag these important issues that we want to work on and that we need to bring to your attention and we'd like to spend some time on. And then, when a work plan is approved, the corporation can deploy staff and resources and be very aware of the types of needs of an advisory committee so that we can get the best possible advice on both the things that we want advice on, as well as the things that the members of our advisory committees who have a lot of expertise want to bring to our attention. So I would encourage the committee to bring forward their work plan, both the 2019 one, which is, the year is nearing the end, but I know there's a couple of draft versions of that, as well as the 2020 work plan, so that we can have a really clear picture on the types of things that we can work on together, and then deploy the adequate staff resources and supports that are needed for the advisory committee to give us the advice that they want. It's a process that the last council set up. I know it's working very well for some committees, and I would encourage that process to be followed, because I think it helps me realize the types and scope of work that's being done by the volunteers on our advisory committees.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I would like to make a comment regarding the Cycling Advisory Committee report. And my comment is around the process. I understand it wasn't an ideal process the way this working report came forward. I do not sit on Civic. I wasn't even aware of this report through the information. I didn't receive it, and I think reports, the working group report itself and the work that went into that, those are documents that we should be allowed to read and give consideration, advice coming from the advisory report. And I want to thank the committee for referring it to staff to look at and give comment. Following up on Councillor Turner's questions around the other plans that are out there, we most likely will have to review, and to you, and through you, your worship, to staff, I'd like to have a better understanding what we can expect, the comments coming back to us or back to the committee, not only with this working group, but how is this process going to unfold coming back to us? And is there going to be a length of time before we receive the information coming back, or just having a better understanding? I don't want to put staff on the spot, because I know there's a lot of information, a lot of plans out there, and I understand we're going through a climate change strategy as well. And so just having a better understanding how all this information, how you will be looking at it, how you will be communicating within different departments, and then how will it be coming back to us so we can do our work, homework, read the reports, the information that we receive from advisory groups, and then take into account what we receive back from staff. And then as we move forward, looking at updating our plans and policies. So a better understanding how this is going to unfold.
Before I ask Ms. Scheer to respond, just a comment. I'm sure we can't, it wouldn't be reasonable to presume that staff would anticipate what they're going to come up with in terms of the result. But I think the comments that I've heard from the councillor had to do with some aspects of priority timing, and I wonder if you could comment on those questions as delivered.
Of course, Your Worship. I don't want to speak specifically to the timeline as to when we'll bring back a response to this report, because we don't know what's in it yet. We haven't had the time to do that work. We believe that there likely will be a need for us to sit down with the authors of the report and get additional information from them and clarify any of their assumptions. There may be things in there that are actionable and can be moved into programs we have quickly. There may be things in there that are actionable with additional funding, and that would be a discussion through a budgetary process. And there may be things in there that we want to bring back to council for additional discussion on a policy basis. Some of those may come independently on a review of this report, or they may be part of a larger basket of review that we want to do related to, as Councillor Turner mentioned, the Transportation Master Plan, our design standards, our Complete Streets program, all of our infrastructure plans that fall into that bigger basket of work related to climate change and climate change response. And Mr. Fleming may have a few things to add to that. He's been stick handling the process on our go forward basis on climate change. This will obviously be a pillar of that discussion, along with a very, very long list of policies and guidelines that we use.
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I think it's been referred to a couple times by councillors. We are anticipating coming forward in the very near future. The target, as we've said a couple times, is November with a climate emergency declaration report. So this is in response to councillors' declaration. We're working hard to try and make that date. We'll see if we can. But this is a collaboration between Ms. Scheer and myself. And certainly all of the information from the report that was received by the committee, Civic Works Committee, would be something that we would bring to bear in that report in one way or another, either at a higher level for further integration, as Ms. Scheer's already indicated, into her processes and mine, or in other ways. So you can look forward to that report, and certainly that information that's been submitted has not been lost on us, and it will be something that will be integrated into our work coming forward to council.
Councillor.
Yes, Your Worship. I look forward to this process unfolding. I want to thank the committee and the advisory group. We're starting that conversation about climate change, and I know it's not going to be easy. Change is not easy, and really look forward to the collaboration and from the work that we can do here in the municipality. I'm really looking forward to moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Your Worship. Two brief things. I had actually attended the Cycling Advisory Committee just to, I like to see what they're doing. My daughter's a cyclist, so I like to know what they're up to. Grateful for the report. Two questions. We also have, the report was also sent to the Transportation Advisory Committee, making sure that committee can have their opportunity to give their feedback as well, just that we're looping everyone in and we feel that it's a wholesome conversation. So just through you to staff, just confirming that they'd have an opportunity to comment on this report as well.
Ms. Scheer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe that's being forwarded through the clerk's process, and we would look to get any comments from Transportation Advisory as part of our review as well, so that you're hearing one set of advice.
Councillor Ploza.
Thank you, and a follow-up through you, Your Worship, to staff. Ms. Scheer referenced the climate change report that we've been all anxiously waiting for that seems to connect lovely back into everything we're doing, and with a 1 to 2 month wait on it, could you clarify what committee is going to come? Is it going to come before SPPC as a whole or through Civic Works?
Ms. Scheer.
Thank you, Your Worship. The clerk is, I'm lip reading well over here, and it's Civic Works. So the intent is to make the November Civic Works meeting, and that's where we are planning to go at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Pelosi.
Your Worship, I would like to move a motion that would come before SPPC for discussion. It seems to be affecting everything we're doing from planning to our infrastructure, Civic Works, and a lot of other things within the city. So I'd like to move a motion that report come before us as a whole here versus through another committee.
Is there a seconder for that as a motion? Oh, pardon me, Councillor Turner, I apologize. You're hard to miss. I'm sorry. There is a seconder. Comments, discussion. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, I just have a question for you, Your Worship, to staff, or maybe this is a question to the clerk. Is it appropriate to go to SPPC, the motion, I don't know the wording of the motion, but as it relates to climate change?
Let's ask the clerk.
Through Mr. Mayor, we in the clerk's office, we go by the council procedure bylaw, which says Civic Works. However, council at any time can vary from the council procedure bylaw and refer it to a different committee. It's within council's right to do that.
So I apologize, just because I need to clarify Councillor Hopkins' points. Are you suggesting Civic Works and SPPC are singly one clerk? Would you just clarify that, please?
Through Mr. Mayor, in accordance with the council procedure bylaw, our advice would be the Civic Works Committee. However, the council has the right to change it to a different committee if they so wish to do so.
So noted. Thank you very much. Councillor Kayabaga.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I just wanted to ask my colleagues as they request for this motion to move forward, will this, maybe to staff, delay the report coming back in a month, just in time to make sure that it makes it through our budget conversations?
We might address that question to staff. Mr. Fleming? The question was about the timing, whether if it went to SPPC. If I understood the question correctly, Councillor, it was...
We answered together.
I was going to say, sit down, Mr. Fleming, we'll get Ms. Scheer on this. But if this went through SPPC versus Civic Works, what's the impact timing-wise? I think that's your question.
So, Your Worship, we were just conferring on this. It won't cause any delay. The declaration initially came through Planning Committee. I think the clerk's quite right that there's been traditionally the work's gone through Civic Works Committee. It's a big issue. Council declared the climate emergency as a whole, and certainly we're in your hands, as the clerk's pointed out. If all of council wants to hear the conversation and the plan, we're glad to do it at SPPC.
Councillor Kayabaga.
I just wanted to confirm that, because I wasn't sure. I heard 2 months and also heard 1 month, November, or like, can we just confirm on when this would be coming back to SPPC? Would this be the next one or the one after?
You sure?
Through you, Your Worship, I apologize. We're juggling a couple of things between service areas right now. Our intent was to make Civic Works on November 19th. There is a little bit of review that's going on internally right now that if we haven't got that all resolved, could potentially delay that out a little bit. But our hope and intent is to make November 19th. If we're going to SPPC, that would be November 25th. So it's same cycle.
Clerk, do you want to clarify?
Just to clarify, the November Civic Works Committee would report out to the November 19th, like an earlier council meeting. So SPPC would report out to a council meeting in December rather than November. So it will delay it a couple of weeks.
So just to clarify then, just to build on Councillor Kayabaga's question for clarification to you, Ms. Scheer, if it went through Civic Works, which would have been the recommended action of the clerk and our normal procedure currently without the amendment, that would be November
26th.
November 26th. And if it goes through SPPC,
December 10th.
does that clarify? All right, thank you. It does for me as well. Other comments or questions? Mr. Lewis, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just on the motion to change committees, I'm going to encourage colleagues to leave it with Civic Works. Everybody can attend every standing committee meeting of council and speak to at every standing committee of council. Yes, there ends up being 5 votes, but whichever committee it lands at, any one of us can participate at any time. So I'm going to follow the council procedural bylaw on this and recommend that we stay with Civic Works.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Worship. I thank my colleague for bringing this forward. As mentioned, the declaration came through a recommendation of the Advisory Committee on the Environment. It was recommended to Council by the Planning Committee and touches on a number of areas, as I talked before, the Cycling Master Plan, the Transportation Master Plan, the Community Energy Action Plan, the London Plan, the Waste Diversion Master Plan. It touches on a lot of areas. And it deserves the full debate and attention of council. If it sits at a subcommittee or one of our standing committees, I would respectfully disagree with Councillor Lewis. Not all members of council can meet the times that the other committees meet. So the expectation is that we're all here for SPPC and we're all here for council. That's the appropriate time for us to have that discussion, and I think the recommendation here is quite warranted, and I think it's a discussion we have as a community. It's a discussion we have as a council.
Any other comments or questions? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
On the report itself, I really appreciate getting the report. Certainly given me a lot to think about. And I think the right thing to do is to refer to staff and get a report back. I'm not too fussed about which committee it goes to. Eventually, I think we're all going to have to wrestle with this issue. We're going to have to talk about it. I think it's perhaps emblematic of local government and the challenge that we're facing here, that the machinery of local government moves relatively slowly. And we can spend a fair amount of time talking about things like what committee should it go to, and not about the bigger issues that are underlying the challenges that are in front of us. So I look forward to talking about those things. I think referring it to staff and getting some advice on these fronts. One of my major takeaways from the report from the advisory committee is the Cycling Advisory Committee is starting to sort of become like EPAC. You know, EPAC is very well known for having working groups that really dig into specific issues, generate very comprehensive reports. And I think I really appreciate that as a general strategy from the advisory committees. It's a huge undertaking to produce something like that. And I want to thank them for the work that they've done. I think it also, when they're touching on so many different things, you can see how interrelated everything is, right? And when we start trying to think about how we're going to make changes across all these different plans, even the idea of updating like the London Plan, some of the London Plan policies are still not in effect because they're appealed, right? So we're talking about, oh, maybe we should change the intensification target. That one's still not in force, the one that we passed years ago. And this is where I say the mismatch between how fast local government can respond and how quickly we might have to make changes on some of these things. The last thing I say is that the extremely good value for money for some of these infrastructure investments, and I don't want us to lose sight of that. A lot of these things really are very cost effective and they make a lot of sense from a financial point of view as well as an environmental point of view.
Thank you. As we look for any other comments, I can't resist the comment that as the Deputy Mayor talks about the wheels of municipal government moving slowly, you should try the federal scene sometimes. It's interesting. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can I ask for clarification? So the motion is future reports related to this matter be directed to SPPC. Where will the, just for clarification, where will the climate emergency report be reported to? Will that go to SPPC or will that go to Civic Works or will that go to Planning and Environment Committee?
I might ask the clerk, we just pointed out something here. Do you mind just bringing that forward at that point?
proposed amendment on the floor is related to the community energy use and greenhouse gas emission inventory and update, et cetera, community action plan.
So I'll read the motion that I have in front of me, that clause
Right,
2
let's do that. We'll come back and clarify, okay? Please.
Do you want me to read the motion?
Why don't you briefly do that quickly?
That clause 2.9 of the 14th report of the Civic Works Committee be amended to add the following new part C. Future reports related to this matter be directed to the SPPC.
Let's go back to the mover and clarify that that was the intent. Then we'll get back to you, Councillor Cassidy.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I was confused. Because up above it, it talks, sorry, I was confusing the two. So what we're talking about is the community action plan, or the climate emergency.
Why don't we have Ms. Scheer just weigh in just to make this even more interesting, please?
Thank you, Your Worship, because we definitely need another person weighing in on how reports are going to go to committee. But my hope and understanding from the member's motion was that you're looking to see our response to the climate change emergency come to SPPC. From there, some future reports may also be suitable to go to SPPC, but if it's all reports related to that matter, that will be almost everything, because as we just discussed, it touches development files, zoning, lots and lots and lots of things. So if I understand correctly, you're just looking for our response that was to go to Civic Works on the climate change emergency declaration response to come to SPPC, and that will lay out our work plan on a go forward.
Okay, my apologies. There was discussion around a whole bunch of different things, and I got them all muddled in my brain. So I apologize if I've added to everybody's confusion. So I'm going to support this. I agree with Councillor Turner. We tend to, as councillors, we tend to pick the committees that we are able to commit to that schedule for. So and we tend to look at the schedule going out over the next year, and we arrange our other events and our other meetings and our appointments accordingly. And we don't always know what's going to be on an agenda until we get closer to, and we don't generally know what's going to be on an agenda until we get closer to that meeting. This is an exception because we're being told tonight what meeting most likely this will report out to. But when it is a large item like this that tends to involve a lot of discussion and debate, I'm always in favor of moving it to strategic priorities and policy. What tends to happen if it goes to a standing committee is there's a fulsome debate at that standing committee, and then that debate and discussion is repeated at council. So just for efficiency's sake, I have no problem with this going to SPPC.
So let's go back to the mover of the motion, because there seems to be a little bit of confusion as to the intent of the motion. We've gone from the Second Advisory Committee to another aspect of another point of this on climate change, and I just want to make sure that the mover is comfortable with where this is going and it's in the right section. Councillor Pelosi, do you have a comment on that?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure what's just outside of that text block, but the intention is just the first climate declaration emergency report that we're waiting for to come back in November. Just that first one comes back to the committee as a whole. We're going to have that robust discussion all at once together in a meeting time that has already been reserved, that committee members will be at, to ensure that as we go back to all our committees, that we know what other councillors are thinking, we can help set a clear path forward and ask staff at one time and berate them with all the questions at once.
So what we're struggling with a little bit is where we tie this in, because what you're discussing is not specifically in the agenda component. So can you help us get to a place where we can support this? Otherwise, it's an issue that's not on the floor in this committee. Colleagues, it's more important to get it right than get it quick, so just bear with us another moment. You're welcome to. I'll give you the temporary floor. You've said it almost every meeting that I've been to, Councillor Squire. We're in agreement. Can I understand what the agreement is then, please? It'd be really nice to know. Clerk?
Your Worship, what we were struggling with is there is nothing on the agenda that relates to the climate change report that's coming forward. And you can only talk about what's on the agenda. So we were trying to tie the clause to something that is on the agenda that is somewhat related to that aspect of it. So we've agreed on adding a section to 2.9.
And can I hear what we would like to have added to 2.9, just for clarification? Or will it sound like the amendment that you had put forward? Councillor Closa, please.
Yeah, thank you, Worship, that we're just adding that as that item deals with our greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, that would be opportunity to add on section C, asking that full wholesome report that will come forward in November on climate change will come back to SPPC as a committee of the whole.
And is that supported by your seconder just because we've gone through some machinations? That would be Councillor Kayabaga. Are you raising a point of order? I was the seconder. Yes. Well, then why don't we hear from you?
Might as well.
All right.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to that, the recommendation from staff on B says it being noted that the city staff are preparing additional details with respect to the city's climate emergency declaration. So, and we could add to that, and that report, it is recommended that that report be presented to this SPPC.
Yeah, I think we have the gist of that. Any other further comments on this? So colleagues, thank you very much, and thank you clerks and also the mover and secretary for clarification around that, and for all comments. So let's turn to the attention to the screen as we vote. Oh, sorry. Oh, I apologize, Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, just for clarification, are we voting just on the amendment? I had another comment about the item. Perhaps you'll tell me when that's appropriate.
Just on the amendment. Councillor. Any other comments? Otherwise, we'll turn our attention to the screen and call the vote. Councillor Morgan?
Yes. With all due respect, I'm not going to vote on something until I can read it, and I don't seem to be able to. Maybe it's just me. I can't see what we're actually voting on. So I want to read it, and then I will decide whether I want to weigh into the debate. But if we're just going to throw it up and vote on it, I'm going to vote against it because I don't know what we're talking about. So I just want to see it first, and then I'm happy to.
I think that's a very good idea. So we'll see the amendment in just a moment. Just a moment.
If you all hit current item, you should be able to see it now. If you hit current item, you should see it. I can give you all the technical reasons why this is happening, but I'm sure that will bore you. So.
I think the clerk was directing that to me, but there may have been 1 or 7 others. Again, colleagues, this is on the proposed amendment. Councillor Morgan, you have a comment?
Yeah, now that I can see it.
Before we vote.
Now that I can see it, I want to weigh in on what's before us. So,
Please do.
I think this needs further clarification, or I'm comfortable asking our staff how they'll operationalize this, which you've heard me ask before, and I'll tell you why that's important. This does not say what Ms. Schur said, that the specific report about the climate action, the climate emergency is going to come before us so that we kind of know the overall plan on how we're going to deal with this. But not all of the reports related to climate emergency. This says future reports related to the climate emergency. We do not want all reports. So I just want to make sure, and if our staff says this direction means we're getting 1 report to SPPC and the rest are going to go where they need to, I'm good with it because I don't want to wordsmith it. I just want to hear our staff say on the record that that's what's going to happen. Then I'm very comfortable with this.
Let's hear from staff. Who would like to weigh in on that? Ms. Schur?
Through you, Your Worship, I suggest perhaps we might want to seek some clarification from the city clerk as well. It right now says future reports, and we would normally interpret that to mean all reports. So I don't know that there's an opportunity to clarify it more to be reflective of only this first strategic attempt to report out on the climate change emergency. I would defer to people who are more expert in procedure than I am.
Clerk, do you want to add your thoughts?
Through Mr. Mayor, I concur with Ms. Scheer. That's how we would interpret it, that any reports related to the climate change declaration would go to SPPC unless directed otherwise.
Well, I think, are you done, Councillor Morgan?
I think the mover wants to fix this, so I'd like to give her the opportunity to do so.
Let's hear what the mover has to say.
Thank you, Your Worship. The intention is just one singular, as in the next upcoming one that we were anticipating in November. I don't want them all to come here. It's just the first one, have a robust discussion, set us off. And then just the upcoming one of that climate declaration emergency plan.
And your seconder, who I happen to know is Councillor Turner, would you care to confirm your support of that?
I confirm my support. Perhaps it needs to be clause D because C is not really related to any of that at all within in the report that it's landing on.
Clerk, do you concur with that, item D?
No,
Where's, I guess to get to D, we'd have to have a C, Councillor. So let's just call it C and let's move on with this if we can, please.
So the initial report.
You want to just jump? Clerk? I'm actually talking to you through council, and that is, so this will be item C. And Councillor Morgan, I'll give you a chance to weigh in again since this is, I just want to clarify that this is the item that you are now speaking to.
Yes, I'm glad we clarified because I think we all had the same intention here and we're all on the same page. This looks much clearer. This looks like Mr. Fleming's report that he was working on is going to come to SPPC and everything else is going to go where it needs to go. So I'm supportive of this.
Bottom line, as it were. All right. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Councillor Van, oh, Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-2.
Thank you. Now I'll look for a motion to accept the report as amended. I'll look for a mover. Councillor Pelosi, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Pardon me, Councillor Hopkins, I apologize. Any other comments or questions about all of that? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I receive a lot of emails on ideas we should do to deal with the climate change. I'm pretty sure we're not going to be able to do all of them, so we will end up having to prioritize. And fortunately, as you remember, we did ask staff previously to bring to us a set of best practices for investing in green and energy efficiency. So I look forward to seeing that as well.
I apologize. I had a thoughtful clerk in giving me more advice than I thought I ever actually needed. But if you don't mind, could you just finish the last part of that, please? And I did need the advice.
Oh, thank you. I would just bring into your attention that we had previously given staff direction to bring back a set of best practices for green and energy efficiency investments, and that will help guide us in choosing the ones we go with. I know there's a bunch of suggestions that were made with this report. I receive quite a few suggestions by email all the time, so we're not going to be able to do all of them, but certainly we'll have to prioritize, and I think that report will help us.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Finally, Councillor Kayabaga.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would like to take the time to thank the Cycling Advisory Committee for the amount of work that they put into this report. And I'm comfortable with the direction that we're taking. And I would just like to make a special mention today about a cyclist who was struck. His name is Tristan Robbie, and he's an 18-year-old Londoner who has spent the last 3 months lying in a hospital bed. A hit and run crash on
Can I ask, Councillor, I apologize. I'm always respectful of colleagues. I'm very also mindful when we have specific individuals' names referenced.
His mother has given the permission to be able to mention this. So he was hit on Exeter Road in the summertime, and as he was turning 18 years old, so this changed the course of his life. But today he was able to go home, and as his mother mentioned, he's very excited, and he's able to communicate through very minimal gestures. So as we commit to safe streets and invest in the proper infrastructure, we can actually prevent future kids from experiencing what Tristan and his family are experiencing right now. So I really look forward to seeing what this report is going to bring back and the comments that staff are going to make, and how they're going to make this plan work together in the direction that we've taken as a council to address having safer streets and also our climate emergency state. So I just wanted to make that comment to let our community that's present here in this room today that we have received a lot of your communications, and we support you. We stand by the work that you're doing. Like my colleague said here, it's a lot of work that you've done, and we are not dismissing it.
Thank you very much. Any other final comments or questions? I have Councillor Lewis, and then then we'll get Councillor Squire to do a wrap, assuming no one else has a comment. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'll be brief so we can see Councillor Squire wrap. Always entertaining to do that. I do want to highlight something that Councillor Morgan raised, and I think it's very important to raise this. These processes don't always work smoothly or easily. And that's why it's very important that moving ahead, we do look at things like our work plan processes and make sure that the standing committees and the advisory committees are talking. As one example, the incentivization of green roofs, that's been something that was initiated in 2016 by the former council, and we're still waiting for that piece to come back. Now it's looking like it's going to come back very soon. I know Councillor Hopkins and I had a discussion about that, but that's been 3 years in the making. So no, things are not going to move as fast as people may like. There is a process to follow, and it's important that we follow through on those processes. Look, there were some good things in this advisory committee report, and I've said this repeatedly. Ward 2 has really no quality cycle infrastructure. I agree with the committee when they say sharrows are not bike lanes. They're not. That's the fact. And in the master cycling plan, there's a proposal for Wavell Street in my ward to have bike lanes. That would allow us to connect 4 schools. Mr. Stafford's here, so I'll reference our soon-to-be open community center and the arena. And that would be a great way to incentivize kids from getting out of mom and dad's car and riding their bike to school. We'd be connecting 4 school communities. That's a great thing, and I appreciate the emphasis on the AAA infrastructure, the value that that brings. I really do. There are other parts of the report that I found less helpful, but I've had a good discussion with Mr. DeGroot from the committee and shared with him how I think that that can be improved. So I am looking forward as well to staff's report back on the Cycling Advisory Committee report. I also wanted to highlight something else that was in the Civic Works report, actually, now that we've discussed the cycling report. And that is, and colleagues will have to forgive me here because I've lost my place, the fact that the advanced traffic management system was brought forward. This is the first part of the transit infrastructure improvement projects that we forwarded to federal and provincial partners for funding. This is part of this is the backbone. We're laying the backbone for the TIM system, and this is going to enhance the traffic responsiveness in this community. Staff have put a lot of work into this already. You know, to folks who the acronyms can be a little confusing, it's essentially the smart traffic signal system, which, by the way, cyclists will include some different detection loops that will mean that you don't have to press the quote-unquote beg button to have the traffic signals change. So this is a very good step forward. Staff put a lot of work into this. So I did want to draw attention to that. It's an important step, and it's the first step that's going to improve car traffic, transit traffic, cycle traffic flow around the city. So thanks to Ms. Scheer and all the team in the engineering department that worked on this.
Thank you. I believe Councillor Scar, you wish to wrap?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I just want to recognize the Civic Works Committee and on behalf of them, I really appreciate the recognition that we did what was the correct course of action in this case. And I really want to thank staff. This first hit our desk on Monday, the day before the Civic Works meeting. We had this mammoth report. And by Tuesday, we had generated and crafted motions to deal with it and make sure that it went to the appropriate places. It was carefully reviewed and came back to council. And I think it's really important because I got a lot of mail in the last 2 days where my response was, what you're asking for, we're doing. What you're asking for, we're doing. We are going to carefully consider it. It's going to come back to us, and we are going to talk about it. So when some people were saying, oh, you're just going to receive it and file it somewhere, that's not what we did. That's not what we intended to do. And I really want to give staff credit, Ms. Scheer's department, for leading the way on that and saying, yes, we want to review it. Yes, we want to reach out. Yes, this is a serious document. So I want to make sure that didn't go by without being said, because it is important. And it's important that the Civic Works Committee also picked up the torch on that to make sure this report was dealt with properly.
Thank you, Councillor Squire. Our colleagues will turn your attention to the screen as we vote on the Civic Works report as amended.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
Thank you, Councillor Squire. You've earned your pay tonight. That's a lot of standing time. 19th report of council in closed session. I'd like to turn to Councillor Hillier.
Thank you very much. 19th report of council in closed session. Your council in closed session reports property acquisition 265 Wellington Road, the Wellington Gateway Project. On the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Services and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer, with concurrence of the Managing Director, Environmental and Engineering Services, and city engineer, the director, rapid transit on the advice of manager and realty services with respect to the property located at 265 Wellington Road, further described as Lot 67, Part Lots 66 and 68, Plan 452, 4th, as in PIN 0836-40094, containing an area of approximately 4,440 square feet, as shown in the location map attached for the purpose of future road improvements to accommodate the Wellington Gateway project. The following actions be taken. The offer submitted by Justin Graham White, the vendor, to sell the subject property to the city for the sum of $332,000 be accepted. That is all.
Thank you, Councillor Lear. Is there a seconder? Who has more fun than us? They do, apparently. Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconds. But we will ask if any of the items wish to be dealt with separately.
Yeah, if I may, on the item that was just raised, I identify a pecuniary interest as I own property within 1 kilometer of that site.
So noted. Thank you very much. Any other comments or items that need to be dealt with specifically? Seeing none, then I'll turn your attention to the screen and call the vote.
Councillor Van Meerbury. Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-1 with 1 recuse.
Thank you very much, colleagues. There are no deferred matters, nor inquiries that I'm aware of, nor emergent motions of which I'm aware. So let's turn our attention, please, to bylaws 403 for 414. Inclusive, I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for introduction and first reading of those bills. Moved by Councillor Cass. I didn't mean to hiss, I'm sorry. So by virtue of the, you'll see just being passed around the added bylaw, which we will deal with separately as a result of the declaration of pecuniary interest. So we're dealing with 403 through 414. I believe Councillor Cassidy was looking to move it. Is there a seconder? Well, thank you, Councillor Hopkins. I appreciate that. Let's call the vote.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
Colleagues, I'll now look for a mover and seconder for second reading of bills 403 through 414 inclusive. Is there a mover? Councillor Pelosi, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Any discussion? Councillor Cassidy.
I like to take opportunities to talk about 660 Sunningdale Road, and this is bylaw number, bill number 408. It's 2 heritage structures. We just did some minor housekeeping a couple of planning committees ago, and these are 2 barns that, and the change in the designation allows the subdivision to be built around it. So these 2 barns are going to be part of this multi-use or use or mixed use development with some commercial, some office, some possibly retail, with a whole bunch of residential. So with these two heritage structures right in the middle, right next to the park that's planned there, it's gonna be a really exciting development. I'm gonna keep talking about it until it's fully built out, and hopefully once the barns are up and operating, you get to see what the exciting thing that's planned for them, and you'll all come out to Ward 5.
Ward 5 is a nice ward. Any other comments? Seeing none. I'll turn your attention to the screen and call the vote.
Councillor Lehman? Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
Colleagues, I look for mover and seconder of third reading and enactment of bills number 403 through 414 inclusive, and add bill number 402 inclusive. Moved by Councillor Van Meerbergen, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Let's call the vote.
Councillor Kyle. Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
Colleagues, I'll look for a mover and seconder for the introduction and first reading of added bill 415. Is there a mover? Councillor Ploza, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I'll call your attention to the screen as we vote.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-1 with one recuse.
Thank you, and I will look for a mover and seconder for second reading of added bill 415. Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Any comments or discussion? Seeing none, I'll turn your attention to the screen. Call the vote.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-1 with one recuse.
I will look for a mover and seconder of third reading and enactment of added bylaw number 415. Moved by Councillor Hillier, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. I'll turn your attention to the screen as we call the vote.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-1 with one recuse.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Before I call for adjournment, I just have an opportunity that I'd like to take advantage of, and that is that from time to time we receive amendments from the floor, or amendments come fairly quickly to us, and you'll note the last several that we've had, we always want to get it right, and it's truly, truly important we get this right. I'm going to encourage, to the extent possible, that when we have a sense of things in advance that we'd like to move, let's take total advantage of the clerk's services to wordsmith it, and because if there's any confusion, it's on me. But to the extent that we can get some support through the clerk to make these clear, and I think that it would take considerable pressure from the clerks, but also I think would add to clarity of the things we're dealing with. So with that, we're going to do a hand vote as I look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Van Meerbergen, seconded by everybody else, but let's just say Councillor Morgan. All those in favor with a hand vote. It looks fairly unanimous. Thank you all.